Costume House with Spencer Williams, a podcast dedicated to the art and storytelling of costume design in film and television. I am your host, Spencer Williams, and for today's episode, we're stepping onto one of the most legendary stages in the world, the Metropolitan Opera, for a production that represents the mountaintop of operatic storytelling. We're talking about Tristan und Isolde. I am so excited to be joined by the incredibly talented costume designer, Clint Ramos, whose work on this production is nothing short of breathtaking. For many artists, Tristan und Isolde is a dream, a towering emotional and deeply visual work, and to bring it to life on a Met stage is an experience like no other. In our conversation, we explore how Clint uses color to shape the emotional worlds of our title characters, from Tristan's deep connection to the sea, to Isolde's striking presence in lush, evocative greens. We talk about texture and scale, and how even through the Met's HD Live series, the costumes feel richly dimensional, interacting beautifully with the movement of the set and precision of the lighting. We also dive into Clint's unique perspective as both a costume and set designer has influenced his approach to this production, and how that interdisciplinary lens shapes the world of Tristan und Isolde. And of course, we get into some unforgettable visual moments. The commanding presence of King Marke, the balance between opulence and modernity, and a powerful, intentional use of white throughout the opera, creating contrast, ritual, and emotional clarity against an already stunning visual landscape. This is a conversation about scale, texture, and the emotional language of costume at its highest level. So without further ado, let's step inside the costume house. I am so happy to be here today with the incredibly talented, someone whom I've been wanting to talk to for so long, costume designer Clint Ramos. Clint, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Spencer.
I'm so excited to talk to you. The opera Tristan und Isolde is such an incredible production. And I mean, when I was asked to talk to you about this, I almost was I was nervous. I was like, this is like the mountaintop of productions. I mean, I don't even feel qualified to be talking to you about this, but I
Oh,
mean,
stop.
I'm not gonna let this pass by. I mean, the costumes are incredible, so I'm excited to get into this.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you
Well,
for having me.
of course. Well, let's do this. So, Wagner's Tristan und Isolde is such a celebrated opera. It is like the mountaintop for so many performers and creatives. And to be a part of this production at the historic Metropolitan Opera of all places is an opportunity like no other. So, first, I mean, can we just talk about what this experience has been like for you? I know this is your second time working at the Met. What has this been like for you?
I mean, it's amazing, to be working at the biggest opera house really in the world, but it's also like, it's kind of like yeah, it's like the mountaintop, the first time this is my first time doing costumes at the Met. The first time I engaged with the Met was through I was designing scenery. So it was a little uh not easier. Costumes is always hard. Okay, I'm just gonna lay it out there. Costumes is always hard.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it's been amazing. Yeah, it's been an amazing experience. Plus also the shop at the Met is they're just unbelievable.
hmm
Like they're basically at the top of their game, and they're in the business of fulfilling designs and making your dreams come true. So
Right.
it was a joy.
Well, it was incredible. So let's talk about our title characters. I was instantly struck by your use of color, just from the very beginning, helping tell the stories of both Tristan and Isolde. Let's start with Tristan, who at the
Yeah,
beginning of this story is leading the ship that carries Isolde at sea. And with that, I feel
yeah,
like Tristan was very tied to the sea throughout the story with your uses of blues, maybe some light purples. Um,
yeah, very
so
much. Yeah.
I feel like that was very intentional with your use of color.
Yeah. I think stepping back a little bit, I think part of this particular production's concept was that the idea of this duality or of this couple really stems from a contemporary framework, so we do
hmm
start them at the table wearing contemporary clothes, but the production employs like multiple kind of I wouldn't say tricks, but devices, where there are doubles of the characters. So we can kind of radiate this idea that what's happening at the table is actually, a container for the myth, for this big fable that happens, wherein we explore the sort of the Celtic myth, right? Um, and sometimes we have triples, so you're seeing multiple Isoldes at the same time, or you're seeing multiple Tristans at the same time. So it was important to me that we needed to sort of really track these characters by color, right? And then, so with Tristan, blue was immediate for me because he is sort of the invader from the sea, right? Although, it is Isolde is also referred to as a sea maiden. I really thought it was more kind of about how she was grounded in the land,
Hmm.
and Tristan was this force coming from the sea,
Yeah.
and sort of exhibits this kind of violence that comes from a really angry ocean,
Yeah.
and so that's how, the blue kind of started. And as with both characters, as they one can look at this opera as really a process of both falling in love and of dying, right? They both die these really protracted deaths. And so, in many ways, that was a big inspiration for how I also deployed how we use those two colors for those two characters. They slowly started to desaturate as we got to the end.
And like you said, on the other hand, Isolde is in very beautiful greens, quite the opposite of her seafaring love affair, very much grounded in the earth.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, she's also like this kind of, she's a little witchy. Is
Yeah.
that okay to say?
Yeah, no, it's very correct.
You know what I mean? Like she creates these potions, she's like, so there's something really grounded with, like, I almost like looked at her as like she deals with herbs and like
Hmm.
plant life, so there's really something kind of rooted in I don't know, in the green, in the forest, particularly a Celtic forest for me. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, for her.
I see what you mean. Okay, so the next question has two parts to it. So I want to break it down. First, I love
Yeah,
your use of texture because I got to watch this on the big screen through the Mets HD Live series. So with that,
yeah,
I got to see the costumes very three dimensionally because I was sitting up close in my recliner seat,
yeah, yeah,
and I
yeah.
got to see all the detail, and I was
Oh my God.
very fascinated by the overall scale of this production as well.
Yeah,
With all the moving sets and the lighting. So
yeah.
and like you mentioned as well at the beginning, you made your Metropolitan Opera debut in 2023 as a set designer for X, The Life and Times of Malcolm X. My questions to you, how did texture play such a role in this opera? And how has your existence as a set designer before influenced your process when it came to approaching the costumes for
Oh my God. I
Tristan
love these
and Isolde?
questions. I love these questions. Well, number one, I think as a set designer, I always think about like what is the what is the sort of like backdrop really that these costumes are going to exist in, right? And so that's number one. And how can we both punctuate what the set designer is doing and what I'm doing, for an overall effect? It's never about like, oh, this is a costume moment or this is a set moment. It's really about like, oh no, this is an opera moment. Every moment is an opera moment. It's to both amplify the music, but also like really tell a story. The textures really came from, as you said, I think nowadays, when I was coming up and when I was going to school, everybody talked about, oh, opera is the scale and, it's far away. So you have to really make these choices like big, the trims are
Yeah.
big, the graphics are big and all that. So you can see it from far away. But with the advent of HD, you kind of have to do both.
Yeah.
you know you kind of have to do like this like big scale, but also when you really get into like the nitty gritty,
Right.
you'll see the details of how many like
I
jewels
was
that
right
you're
in
putting.
there. I
Yeah, I mean, because they get in there, and then my big anxiety is always about the wig lace.
Yeah.
But like any costume designer's anxiety. But like for me, the textures played a big part of it because also allowed me to kind of really think about the bigger themes of what I was trying to do, right? So when we think about Isolde and when we think about Tristan and the court that Tristan is bringing, I mean, Isolde is basically a captive, right?
Hmm.
To write this court, I kind of wanted that court to be unlike the organic kind of life that Isolde is coming from. So I wanted that all to be in metals and in leather, sort of like almost like this kind of like celebrated warrior class, right? But elevated, right? And Isolde, I kind of really wanted to use a lot of like organic shapes, but still really grounded in like natural fibers,
Hmm.
but also natural elements like metal, like, she's wearing a lot of like gold because she is indeed a princess, but also a lot of like these jewels, like these like precious and semi-precious stones that's sort of like really sprinkled on her as if it's no big deal, right? Like this is like I'd imagined this culture that Isolde is coming from to be like, oh right, like these are the found gems and metals in that land, and this is what they're wearing, right? And then for the rest of the kind of like the bigger idea, I worked with this idea of like pleats, a lot
Sure.
of pleating, a lot of like weaving of leather. The pleating really comes from this idea that number one, as they get more and more in love, the idea of mortality and immortality and this idea of like, oh, how we need to really leave our bodies and ourselves, like the self that we're so attached to, is unfolding, right?
Hmm.
And so this idea of unfolding and folding was really kind of like it was very evident to me, right, that we needed to kind of like deploy some sort of like fabrication technique that kind of mirrored that visually. And the weaving really is about kind of like this, like how do we merge these two spirits, these two souls, right? And then how do we unweave them, right, as they let go of, as they slowly die. And so that's kind of really the idea behind the texture, right? And also really wanting, for me, most of the opera happens in these tunnels,
Yeah.
and they're in these tunnels, and these tunnels, like any other tunnel, has like a ceiling above, because it's a tunnel. And the lights, have a hard, you can't really do like above the head lighting, right? Everything has
Hmm.
to come from the front or from the sides if you can access the side in this tunnel. So to me, a lot of reflective materials needed to be deployed in the opera,
Hmm.
because Ez's beautiful set was also very matte. It was like a matte gray, which was necessary for a lot of the video content that we
Yeah.
had too. Right. And so that's kind of like where all of these like ideas, like it was a confluence of ideas that made me feel like, all right, like I'm just going to put as much like metallic and as much leather and as much like fabric manipulation that I could that made sense.
Yeah. So with that, I mean, how much collaboration then do you have with other departments? I imagine this must have been a very large conversation with everyone else working on this opera.
Yeah, no, I mean, we started working on this maybe 2 years ago.
Okay.
Yuval, the director, Yuval Sharon,
Hmm.
unbelievable opera director, had like started like 5 years before the opera,
Right.
like really with this like idea of what he was trying to do. But when I joined the team, all of these were just ideas, right? And I remember that day we met like maybe 2 years ago in London, and nobody had a solid idea about uh, what the design would look like, right? And these conversations really are like, oh, so what is the opera about, right? And that's how we kind of came up with this. Like, isn't like what's happening to them happening to every couple on Earth? And what if, right? Like, because there's this idea of the hourglass,
Yeah.
right? And Yuval had talked about this fascination about like how space, right? Like what is happening, if you keep on zooming out and zooming out and zooming out and zooming out, the thing that we feel so intense about and feels like the largest thing that could possibly happen to a human being, like falling in love, right? Or death or all of that kind of stuff. But if you keep on zooming out in space, right? That is like a little fleck of sand when you really consider it,
Yeah.
right? And so that, and also this idea of time and how compressed time is, right? That was the initial idea. Like, okay, what if this whole opera existed in a second? That conversation, that space between a couple when they're at a table, like either for breakfast or dinner, you know what I mean? That like really, that kind of, that those silences or whatever it is, what if it is held in that? And that's how it radiated, right? So a lot of like the initial conversations were about feelings, about our own relationships with our partners. And then over the months, it starts to give form and shape. And I know a lot of people talk about collaboration. And sometimes like I've worked on projects where there really isn't, we're kind of like existing in our own lanes,
Yeah.
and that's fine too. I love those projects because you know what I mean. But this was like, no, let's get into each other's lane kind of moment, and it
Yeah.
was really satisfying. A lot of the video content, like Ruth Hogben, our amazing video designer, and Jason Thompson, they shot a lot of the textures that you talk about to create textures on that you see on screen. One thing that we didn't talk about though was, and we were just like, holy cow, like we've been in each other's minds so much that when Tristan appears in the third act in that, kind of like painted robe, that it literally was like a manifestation of what they were projecting, which was this like sea calming
Mm.
itself down, yeah.
Yeah. Another character I do want to talk about though was I was instantly taken by King Mark. I mean,
Yeah.
when we were breaking hearts in the first two acts, I was half expecting to see this dopey king walk in, but instead we had this very opulent, well dressed, well mannered, put together, stately man. Obviously, incredible performance, and his
Yeah.
costume was astounding. I mean, you were just very taken with him, and it blended well with this world, yet felt very contemporary. Tell me about
Yeah.
what inspired his costume.
Yeah, King Mark. When you do this opera, you usually see the chorus, right? And that chorus is basically his kingdom, right? That when at the arrival of like Isolde and Tristan, we chose to put the chorus, and they're usually male. It's a male chorus, right? Like she's arriving into this like testosterone-filled land. We chose to put them behind the scrim, right? Like as shadows. So for me, like a lot of like what King Mark was like he had become kind of like this repository of all those textures that I was talking about, the leather, the gold, and
Yeah.
everything, right? But I also was really interested in like, okay, S- Speedo, the bass baritone who plays him, is like 6'3", 6'4". I was like, oh, that's a lot of surface area that we can actually
Mm-hmm.
like have fun with, right? And so for me, it was really about that, like, how can we make him both Byzantine, right? And also like reflect like modern couture finishings, from like the stuff that John Galliano does, but also like the stuff like this, amazing Dutch designer Fong Lang does, which is like these appliques of metallic threads and fabric mixed with like leather and everything. And so that's kind of like he's like basically in gold and leather, and he's like the apotheosis of those two elements. He is kind of like the element itself, right? And he wears this crazy crown, and it's
Yeah.
like it's this crown of thorns, kind of, you know what I mean? But like it's also it evokes this kind of idea of the power, right? And the magnitude of what this power can do, which is basically like, you know, capture a princess and take her for his bride, But he's mostly in golds and bronzes and browns, and then he experiences this sort of spiritual kind of change too in the end, and we sort of desaturate him like we do with Tristan and Isolde.
And speaking of the desaturation, throughout moments in the opera, specifically toward the end, there's this absence of color. The specific use of white, especially as Isolde is lost toward the end, through ritual, and especially this incredible horn player. By the way, I really love his costume, which I can't get enough of. So, talk to me behind the symbolism behind the desaturation we get to see in the final act.
Yeah, in the final act, you really are exposed to the biggest tunnel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we always looked at that tunnel as the portal to death, right? But instead of like being kind of like, the Grim Reaper or something really dark, we see death through Isolde's eyes. There's two versions of death here, right? You can die like Tristan, saying, why the F did this happen to me? And why is this happening to us? Right. And all that kind of stuff. And you sing a 45-minute song as you're dying, right? Or you could choose to die like Isolde and basically say, listen, we got to let go. We have to go. We remember we talked about love that goes beyond us and our bodies, right? We just need to let it go, right? And so it's a manifestation of that, right? Like that the death portal is white. It is sort of calming, right? That death is just the beginning of a higher plane, right? And we looked at the horn player really, he's like in many sort of iterations of Tristan, he has a particular like profession. He's either like a court member or a shepherd or some, you know what I mean? Something like that. But in ours, we really looked at him as the sort of the gatekeeper
Mm-hmm.
to this kind of spiritual world, right? And he is also where I deployed a lot of the pleating techniques, it
Mm-hmm.
evokes a lot of those Japanese designers. And I just really wanted him to be kind of grand in a very quiet way, So I experimented a lot with the shapes, on him. And behind him are like these 20 dancers who are, dressed almost the same, but, like really simpler, to just kind of like radiate this idea that, there are these almost like these molecular souls bouncing off of the, tunnel. You know what I mean? That's kind of like the idea behind that. There's the white um uh and the death tunnel, you know. Yeah.
I love talking to you about this production. It was just so beautiful, so incredible to see. My first, I guess, watching opera on screen. Before I let you go, what did this experience mean to you, Clint?
Oh, it was really, to me, I enjoy these thought exercises. I'm more of like, more than, you know, more than any other process, I think, in the design, kind of journey that we all take as a designer, the idea of ideas is what I'm kind of addicted to, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like, well, then how do you make that happen? Like, how do you convey that idea? Because most of them are philosophical, most of them are like, very heady, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then you're just trusting the audience to kind of like get what you're trying to do, right? And so to me, it really meant that design is such a tool for thinking,
Yeah.
particularly costume design, right? Like, when we think about costumes, we immediately think about like, oh, they're clothes and hence they're highly attached to fashion. That's true too, right? But like I think more than anything, when you design for the performing arts, whether it be a Broadway show or an opera or a movie or anything like that, it really is about number one story. But you get such an opportunity to imagine how to convey ideas. And that's, working on this opera and at the Met, like really meant that I could do that in its sort of like most um kind of like maximal and magnificent form. Do you know what I mean? Like, and
Mm-hmm.
so it was highly satisfying. It was a lot of work, but but it was incredibly satisfying when audiences are like, "Oh, right, I'm getting this. I am getting this thing. I'm getting why they did it this way."
Yeah. Tristan and Isolde, costume designer Clint Ramos. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been such a pleasure. I'm so glad I could give you your flowers today.
Oh my
Thank you so
God.
much
Thank
for
you,
joining me.
Spencer, for the
It's been
opportunity.
such an honor. Thank you so much. The Costume House with Spencer Williams is a production of The Art of Costume. This episode was hosted, produced, and edited by Spencer Williams. To discover more conversations with the designers shaping film, television, and theater, visit theartofcostume.com or follow us on social media at The Art of Costume. And don't forget to connect with me on Instagram at HostSpencer. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts or watch on YouTube. And stay tuned for more episodes celebrating the designers shaping today's most captivating films, television series, and stage plays.